So tonight we're going to make a potato pot pie, and what I like about this recipe is that it is extremely versatile. In the innards of the pot pie can be used for so many things. You can put it over pasta, over rice. I like it over a baked sweet potato. You can use it in a pot pie. You can put it over quinoa. There's a lot of things that you can do with it. So when I make my pot pie, I usually double the recipe for the innards, and then I use it for some other purpose a different day during the week. Does that make sense? Yeah. Very versatile. And although listed here are the ingredients, I don't always stick with that. So I stuck with that today for yours, but the one that I'll make tonight, you'll see maybe a little bit different than that. You can make it your own. So the first thing that we do is we slice up some carrot. Now, if I'm in a real rush, I cheat, and I just use mixed vegetables that has carrot and peas already in it. But if I have the time, then I actually will chop up the carrot. Now, when you are chopping up your vegetables, I already took the tails off of these carrots. But when you're chopping up your vegetables, your tail pieces of your carrot, of your celery, of your onion, of your garlic, keep it and stick it in a little pan. You can keep the little pan in your refrigerator. Like today, I made a lot of pot pies, so I had a lot of little tail pieces. But most days, I don't. I may have a few tail pieces today and a few tail pieces tomorrow, but by the third day, I've got several tail pieces, and I keep them in a pot in the fridge, and then I simply cover that pot with water. Cover all of those tail pieces with water, and I sit it on the back of my stove to simmer. And there you've created your broth for soup, for sauce, for sautéing. If you don't want to sauté in oil, you can freeze the broth in little ice cube trays. You can pop out an ice cube and use that to sauté your onions or to sauté your vegetables if you're making a different kind of dish. So I most always keep the tail pieces of my vegetables. Now you don't want to use too many of the, thank you, Lily. You don't want to use too many of the pieces of onion paper, because that can make your broth bitter. So when you cut off the end of the onion and there's still some of the white piece of the onion, you can use that. But when you peel your onion and it's just the paper around the onion, you can use 2 or 3 pieces of that, but not a lot. So we've got our carrot. You can dump that in. Now, when I'm at home, I use the entire piece of celery. Some people don't, but I do. I'll either use it in the dish that I'm preparing, or I'll chop off the end and I'll use it for decoration. Maybe I'm making hummus. Well, that's kind of a pretty little decoration, or, something. But for the purposes of this, I use it all. But if I'm wanting to make a bigger container of broth, maybe I'm going to make a ginormous soup and I'm going to need a lot of vegetable broth, then I may just chop this whole thing off and throw it into my end pieces. Does that make sense? Okay. So we'll chop up our celery here. I washed this earlier. All right, can you dump that in for me, Lily? And then we'll get our potato. Perfect. Thank you. All right. Now, I don't always put a full cup of potato, and if I've made potatoes earlier in the week and I have some left over, then I will use already cooked leftover potatoes. Does that make sense? So when you're preparing your food, think about your menu, what you're going to have, and if you can, make a little bit of extra of something that would save you work later on. And that's the other piece. It's really good to make sure that you have a menu. So when you go to the grocery store, you're buying what you need versus what looks good, right? Because everything looks good. And we get home and it either turns green and fuzzy in the refrigerator and we never use it, or we're buying a bunch of garbage that really isn't good for our health anyway, right? And we never want to go to the grocery store hungry. Why? Yeah, because then you'll really buy things that you don't need or won't necessarily be good for your health. So if you just take half an hour sometime during the week or weekend and make a menu for what you're going to have, then when you go to the grocery store, you're buying for that menu. And you'll actually end up saving money because you're not buying all of this extra stuff that you really don't need, that's just going to turn green and fuzzy in your refrigerator, right? And when you're preparing your menu, then you can look to see, to make sure, number one, that it's healthful, and number two, that you have everything that you need in order to do that. So we've got our carrots, our celery, our potato. I ran out of peas, so we're going to use mixed vegetables as peas. There's some peas in there. That looks good. And then a cup of water. All right. We're going to get the heat turned up here. All right. That's going to start cooking. Now, Lily, can you stand here and keep an eye on that, sweetie? Thank you. This is our broth that we've made that I've literally just had seeping on the back of my stove most of the afternoon. Okay, so you can't see this very well, but you will. This is a big jar, and I really don't need a jar that big. Actually, sweetie, could you hold that there for me, just like that? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pour this out. The liquid is now down in the jar. There we go. And then I close it up and I stick it in my fridge. And there's broth when I need, vegetable broth for something. Or if I'm not going to be using it, right away, like I said, I will put it in ice cube trays and simply freeze it. And then if I need broth, I get a few ice cubes out. Or if I'm sauteing something, it's a wonderful thing to saute in. So, how long will it keep in the fridge? I don't know, because we use it. I'd say probably up to a week. I certainly wouldn't keep it longer than that. And if you're not going to use it, or you're not going to, you might use some and then put the rest in the freezer. I've also frozen it in little, tiny little round Tupperware type containers. But there you go, there's your broth. All right, back to our pot pie. So now we're going to make the sauce for the vegetables. Are they cooking here? They're working on it. So I put a cup of liquid in here to cook with the vegetables. What you're going to do is you're going to pour that off. Now, if this was allowed to cook completely, it would cook for about 10 minutes or so. The potatoes aren't going to be completely done, but they're going to be, getting soft. They'll finish their cooking. They will finish their cooking in the oven, right? So to save time, I'm just going to go ahead and turn it off. when you're finished at home and you pour the liquid off, you may or may not have a full cup of liquid. You pour the liquid off of your vegetables, and then you can use water or your broth that you made to make up the difference, okay? But you want a full cup. Does that make sense? All right, I had enough. That's good. So I'm going to pour that right in here on my cashews. Now, the cashews that we use are raw, and whenever you're using raw cashews, you always want to rinse. So we're going to get our seasonings here. And it calls for 1.5 teaspoons of garlic powder. I'm just about out of onion powder here. We'll see if we got enough to make it. And it calls for 1 teaspoon of salt. I actually generally use 1/2 teaspoon. And then all you do is whiz it up. Now when you put this in your blender, last month we made something that we used cashew cream for. This is essentially cashew cream. So you want to make sure that you blend this really, really well. There should be no little gritty pieces, right? You're going to blend it until it's smooth. Because this is a schwanky blender, it's going to do it really fast. At home, I might have to let it run, you know, for several minutes. Hang on to your ears here. Okay, we're going to call that good, and I think it is good. Put that in the sink for me, please. So the liquid I'm going to take and simply pour over my cooked vegetables. Can you put that in the sink, please? I very rarely ever make my own crust. I very rarely ever take the time to do it, but I brought the recipe. Okay? Wicked easy. Wicked easy. So it calls for either barley or brown rice flour, either almond butter or cashew butter, salt and water. That's it. You simply mix it up and roll it out. That's all you do. What I normally do is I will buy a whole wheat pie crust. Okay? That's what I did for you tonight. And what you'll do is you want to leave them frozen, okay? This one's been out for a little while, so we'll see how it goes. Leave them frozen, take it out of your freezer, open it up, and then you just pour in your innards. And once your innards are done, I take a knife and I cut around the bottom of the pie crust. Can you see that circle? Now, if this was frozen, this would pop right out. I lay it on top. And then I take the edges and I just lay it around.
This needs to be called Lazy Man.
It's true. It's busy mama's pot pie.
Clever woman.
And because there's so many holes in it, I don't have to prick the top.
Fabulous.
But if I were making, actually making my crust, you'd need to make 2 recipes so you could actually have a top and a bottom. And I made, 7 pot pies tonight, so I wasn't going to make 14 pie crusts. But that is essentially, honestly, this is what I do for my family. It's very rare that I make a pie crust, and it's ugly, but it's ugly once you chew it anyway, right? So it doesn't really matter. So that's it. And it's really not that ugly when it comes out of the oven. I hope. We'll see. So hang tight. Oh, I will tell you also, for the sauce, for the cashew cream, I will oftentimes make more of that also and keep it in the fridge, because this is just the cashews and the water and the seasonings, right? So here it is. I could add some basil to this and put it over pasta and call it fettuccine alfredo. I could do all sorts of things with this. I could thicken this, right? Maybe add a little nutritional yeast and use it as a cheese substitute. All right? You can use this for many, many, many different things. You can pour it over spaghetti. My husband really likes it as a cheese substitute by adding a little nutritional yeast. It turns it yellow. Nutritional yeast also gives a cheesy-like flavor. And there you go. I would thicken it more, obviously, over the stove, because cashews will thicken. When they're heated, they'll thicken. All right? So let's see how our pies turned out here. See, it's ugly, I told you. But it's edible.